And those statements were these. We called them the 3Fs because they were started with 3Fs, not surprisingly. Followers of Jesus, family on a mission, friends with the poor. But it's really clear, isn't it, that if you look at organisations that have mission statements, some of them fall well short of their goals and their ambitions. I can think of a particularly well-known emergency service, they call themselves, that has failed on a number of occasions to recover my car in a timely way. But yes, words are cheap, aren't they? And actually what makes us those things is only really as much as how we live them out, because words on a web page or on a banner really don't mean a lot. And so we're going to just look at those and think about those a little bit over the next 3 weeks. And we're going to start with followers of Jesus. And it seems, to be honest, this one seems like a bit of a no-brainer for a church to have followers of Jesus as one of the cornerstones, because Jesus is the cornerstone of the church. He's the foundation of every church. That is what the church is, people that gather around who Jesus is. And in fact, the early church were known as the Way. It was a shorthand way of saying that the church these people were followers of the way of Jesus. In Acts 9, Saul, who at this point hasn't encountered or met Jesus, so he's anti-Jesus and he's anti the church, he goes about and he sets about going to destroy and arrest and get killed people of the way. If you read Acts 9, that was the early church. That was how they were known. And it was about people that followed the way of Jesus, his teaching, his example. But more than that, it was about people that had committed to Jesus being Lord and Saviour, the one that they were following. He was the way, and we sung it in one of those songs. He was the way, the truth, and the life. He was the way. And the Bible speaks about Jesus in his earthly ministry going around many times, and one of the things that he says, the invitation that he says to many people is, follow him. Follow me, he says. He says it's to the disciples, Andrew and Peter. One of the first things he says to them is, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And Philip and Matthew were also invited using these words. Jesus says to would-be disciples, follow him. And there were 3 accounts of him recorded saying these words about every disciple. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And in the past couple of weeks, I've had 2 different conversations with people about Jesus. And the first was someone who was telling me all about their difficulties and the busyness of their life. And at the end of the conversation, they said to me, their pastor, the sort of closing comments were, I still believe in God. But God just wasn't a priority to them. They couldn't find a way to involve him in their everyday life. Believing for them seemed a bit of a vague notion. It was something that was in the background, but there didn't seem to be any life there. There was no relationship there. And then there was a conversation I had with another person, though, and they were in a real dilemma, and their decision had serious consequences for them and for their wider family. And I'm not going to go into the details about it, but what was really striking to me about that conversation was that this dilemma only really came about because they loved Jesus and they had a choice to make about whether they were going to follow what he said, his ways. See, for them, Jesus wasn't the background, he was foreground, and they were earnestly seeking and saying to me, how do I walk with Jesus? How do I honour Jesus in this situation? See, they expressed their love for Jesus through their obedience to him. And when they spoke about Jesus to me, there was life and light in their eyes as they spoke about their love for him. And what it struck me about these 2 conversations, even in the way that they played out, was where Jesus featured in them. Because in the first conversation, Jesus was in the background. He was at the back of the conversation. it was the last thing said. And in the other conversation, it was about Jesus being foreground. That was the cause of their dilemma. And if they didn't feel that conviction, that love for Jesus, this problem that they were facing would have just gone away. Now, my point about sharing those two stories is really just to say whether Jesus is in the foreground or background makes a difference when we're speaking about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. There's a big, big gap between believing in God and following him. Jesus called people to follow him, not just believe in him. And of course, our current age of following, the use of that word, has taken on a whole different meaning altogether. When we follow on social media, we mean something very different to the following that Jesus is talking about, or the following that was in the ancient world. Following on social media is picking a number of people that I might want to get informed about, or I might want to be influenced by. We're picking and we're choosing. And in fact, if you're a social media type person, if you've got social media accounts, you're probably following a multitude of different people. We want their influence in our lives in some way. We want something from them, but actually we're going to pick and choose. And our social media feed is going to basically select for us. Take a bit from here and a bit from there, whatever. And that's very different from the kind of following that Jesus is talking and looking for. If we follow our sat-navs like we follow social media with all those voices, we'd be in a lot of trouble. And there was a situation when this actually happened. I can remember with Jonathan and Therese and a few others, we were on a journey into the centre of London. And by some strange reason, Jonathan had managed to get both Google Maps and Waves, another sat-nav, activated at the same time on his phone. And so we would be driving through London and then it would say, turn left. And so Jonathan would turn left. And then a few minutes later, it would say, no, turn around. You've got to go back the other way. Whatever, we'd be turning around the other way. And the reason was, it was quite a long time actually, wasn't it? I think we were doing this. After quite a long time, we suddenly realised that we had both sat-navs running and they were competing on the route. So you can't follow two things at the same time, especially when they want to send you in different directions. And that's the sort of following that Jesus is after. Follow me means by definition, put Jesus in the foreground, and the other voices, the other influences, they have to sit in the background. So we're going to look at one passage where Jesus says, it's one of those follow me moments. I said there were a number in the Bible, but let's look at just one, and it's in John 21. So it's, sorry, that's me pressing the wrong button. There we are. So let me read it. Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples by the Sea of Galilee, and this is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there: Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples. And Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. We'll come too, they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. And at dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, fellows, have you caught any fish? No, they replied. And then he said, throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat and you'll get some. So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he'd stripped for his work. He jumped into the water and he headed to shore. The others stayed with the boat and they pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from the shore. And when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. Bring some of the fish you've caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and he dragged the net to the shore. And there were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. Now come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to the disciples since he had been raised from the dead. And after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs." Jesus told him, "Feed my lambs." Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know that I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. And a third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus had asked the question a third time. And he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and you went wherever you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go." Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. And then Jesus said to him, "Follow me." So this beach scene is like the third appearance that Jesus has made following his resurrection to the disciples. And I just want to mention three things about following, what it means to be a follower of Jesus from this story. And the first of those is these. Why follow Jesus? Why do I follow him? What was it about Jesus that meant that they responded to that follow me invitation? And then secondly, I just want to mention something about being a follower. So really following him. What does that look like? And thirdly, I want to just mention something about what it means to be a follower of Jesus together. So firstly then, why do I follow Jesus? What is it about this invitation that he gives us that means that people choose him? The earliest followers of Jesus, if we look at the disciples, they were in awe of Jesus a lot of the time. And certainly they were so convinced by him when they first encountered him that they left stuff behind, their businesses, they went travelling with him. But if you read through those accounts, you can see that they're confused and they're mystified by him a lot of the time. They get glimpses about his plan, but they often misunderstand him, even as they trust him and go with him on the journey. And a friend of mine's been reading his Bible and he texted me the other day. This is the text that he sent me. He said, "I've realised that none of his disciples ever got what he was saying, really, did they?" And I thought that was quite a good comment to make. And in a sense, it's true. When we read their accounts, my friend, is true that they didn't get it a lot of the time, but they kept going with him for 3 years. Something about Jesus stuck, and something about him persuaded them that he was worth trusting in and keep going with. They saw him as their Lord, even as they didn't grasp everything that meant. And it's worth remembering that along that 3-year journey, there were plenty of people that didn't follow Jesus, that didn't go with him. So yeah, they didn't get it all, but they did keep going with him. But even these followers reached a crisis point, didn't they? So if we know the story of the crucifixion, of Jesus' death, we know that they all abandoned him in the end. Even those that had been walking with him for 3 years, they were too afraid, too fearful to follow him into that moment. And it was only then in one of these encounters, at these times on the beach, seeing Jesus back from the death, that was when things for them really started to fit together. The purpose and the meaning behind his death only becoming clearer after his death and resurrection. And it's this moment when Jesus initiates this encounter with some of the disciples. We're told that he's done it before. This is the third occasion. He is the one that calls them to the shore. He's the one that says, "Come to me." He's the one that invites them to eat with him. And this is what Jesus is like. He's always the one that initiates. He's always the one that invites. They'd abandoned him. They'd left him to die, but he wasn't finished with them. I want you to just take a few minutes, just to turn to the people around you. If you're a follower of Jesus, what was it that led you to that first decision to follow him? Just think about one or two key things. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, why do you think those disciples did at this point? So just turn for a few minutes and talk to someone around you. Okay, I'm going to bring you back. I'm aware that is a very short amount of time to share about what I would imagine, if you are following Jesus, is a life-changing moment. But what I would say to you is that there's opportunity to carry on those conversations. And it's good to think about that moment, and it's good to think about that decision of what was it that drew you to Jesus. When we choose to respond to that invitation to follow him, some of it, I'm sure, was probably out of our own needs. Jesus is inviting us into a relationship with our Creator, our greatest need. There's that verse, is the famous verse, John 3:16, that starts like this: "For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son." See, Jesus is sent and he seeks us out. And one of the ways Jesus illustrates this is he tells that story of the shepherd that goes out for the one and leaves behind 99 sheep while he goes and looks for the lost one. Jesus is seeking us out, is very personal, and it shows that actually everyone matters to him. And I know for me that when I first responded to Jesus, I know I was in a place of need. For me, I was caught up in feeling very bitter in life, and a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, and also just a sense of loss and meaningless to life, hopelessness. And it was that need that Jesus spoke into. And he awakened something in me, even when I didn't realise that it was Jesus that I was missing or what I needed. He had offered an answer to things, a need in me that I hadn't been able to find elsewhere, and I had been looking elsewhere. And he says he's the way, the truth, and the life. We sung that. He's a companion to the people that are lonely. He offers forgiveness to those that are guilty. He offers freedom to those that are bound up. He offers peace to the restless. He offers relief to those that feel burdened. And he says he offers life to those that are spiritually dead. And above all else, he says he offers love and life everlasting. He says there's a hope here beyond death itself. What kept the disciples following Jesus? What was it that drew people to Jesus? I would suggest something was that he showed that he loved them. The way he spent time with them, the way he responded to their needs. And on this beach, in that moment, the disciples knew that Jesus loved them. He came back for them. And in that moment, he invites them again. And for me, Jesus' death was a fresh start for me, because it convinced me that Jesus loved me. In 1 John 4:19, it says, "We love because he first loved us." And we follow people we trust, those who we know are for us, that love us, that care for us, that know and care for our greatest needs. On the many walks that I've done with my family, my kids trust me because they know that I love them. They'll follow me because they know that I care about them. Many times that they've gone on those journeys, they've got no clue about the route. They've got no clue about the length of time it is, although they will ask me for estimates. But they've come to trust me in getting them home. Now, I have wondered if that's a really good example of how Jesus is, because there have been times on those walks that they've gone a bit longer than they've planned, or we've got a bit lost. But I think we can, if you're a parent, you might have taken a child on a walk and can think about that moment when they plonk themselves down in the path and say, "No more, I'm going no further than this." sometimes they go off in the other direction. I remember one time when Joel refused to carry on with whatever we were doing, the path and the direction we were going, and he chose to walk the opposite way down the beach away from us. And I saw him striding off confidently into the distance, but I sort of waited and watched him, and I knew that actually he'd only go so far. Because ultimately in that moment, he actually knew that I cared about him and I was going to look after him. And actually I was his safe place. And sure enough, after a long walking down the beach, he's looking back to see he can still see me. And then he eventually comes back. He knew that I cared enough for him that I was going to get him home. And you might think about that and think, actually, there have been moments when I've been following Jesus, walking with him, when I've got to a point where I've just plonked myself in the middle of the road and I can't go on. I just can't. I can't ask whatever Jesus is asking me. I can't do that. Or it might be you've been in those moments where you've been following Jesus and you've gone in the opposite direction to him. But what I would say is there was no way in a million years Joel was ever going to get out of my sight. And I was always going to go after him. And that's what this beach story is all about. John, who writes this, says he, in this story and all the way through his account, he says he is described as the one Jesus loved. And he's not named throughout the book of John, but he's the one that Jesus loved. That's his identity is rooted in Jesus loving him. What a great place to find your identity. What a great place. The love that God has for you. So why be a follower of Jesus? Well, that I would say because he loves you. He cares for you. I'm always encouraged by Tony's prayers because when I pray with him, he's a man in his senior years. I hope he won't mind me saying that. But he's one that always testifies of God's love and care for him. His goodness, God's goodness towards him, one that he can trust. And that's my testimony of walking with Jesus, of following Jesus, is even in those moments when I plonk myself down or I've gone away, when I turn and come back to the cross, when I come back to that moment where Jesus showed the extent of his love for me. So I would say if you're struggling to follow Jesus, have him in the foreground, or you're in one of those turn away moments or one of those moments where you're plonked on the ground, I would say meditate on his love for you, on the cross again. And secondly, I just want to mention something about, I said the phrase follow kind of followers. I don't know if people remember, some of you were in Gracechurch maybe a few years ago. Robin, my brother who did a talk last week, he made a phrase that really stuck with me. He said, we're to be people that belong to the church. And he used it twice. And his point was that there's kinds of belongings to thing, and then there's a kind of intensity of belonging, of choosing to belong. And it struck me that there were different kinds of following. And I've sort of mentioned that already. You can have your Facebook following. But Jesus says he wants us to be follow types, intensely following him. He wants us to go in his direction only. So if I ask Ben to walk over there and I'm going to follow him, it means going there with him, listening to Ben's voice and going where Ben goes. He wants us to be follow kind of followers. And here on the beach, Jesus is doing a work of restoring Peter. So Peter, you may or may not know, but Peter was one of those that he was the one that denied Jesus 3 times. And what happens in that is Jesus here repeats 3 times about this love, this do you love me? Do you love me? And he's doing a work of restoration in Peter. He's basically saying this past failure, this past disappointment of where you so proud and so confident you could follow, and he's saying, no, look, he's saying, I'm wiping that clean. And that takes time with Jesus. And I wondered if Jesus had noticed in those two other times whether Peter was a bit more in the background and had kind of been aware of the fact that he couldn't be quite so bold in his claims. I'm going to stick with you, Jesus, to the end because of this mess up that he'd made. And I think here Jesus just takes him along the beach. It's a pretty amazing scene, I think, of walking along the beach with him and just kind of saying, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? 3 times. It's quite funny, Peter at the end of it gets kind of like, well, of course I do. He gets quite frustrated with him. But Jesus is doing something there. Jesus knows, doesn't he? He says this, Peter says that, I know. And it's a remarkable thing to me that Jesus wants to take time in restoring Peter here. And one thing I noticed, when I thought about this scene along the beach of Jesus and Peter just walking and strolling along the beach, if you read the rest of it, you'll see that John, who is the disciple that Jesus loved, is just hanging around in the background there as well. But they're just walking along the beach. And I thought there's a remarkable picture in the Bible, in the first few chapters of the Bible, where God is walking. It says this, God is walking in the cool of the evening and he calls out Adam and Eve to join him. And I don't even know how that works in terms of God just walking with Adam and Eve. But it's a great picture of just going for a stroll and inviting them to join him on a stroll. He's not saying to Adam and Eve, come on, let's go and build, let's go and plant, let's go and create, go and do. He just says, come and take a walk with me. And I love that picture, and I love the picture of Jesus and Peter on the walks and the stroll down the beach. And sometimes I can walk and I can be so purposeful in it. Yesterday we needed to get the train, me and May, so we were marching up the road to get the train. But actually there's those evening walks in the summer particularly where you can just go out and just have a little meander. And I like the fact that God wants our relationship to be like that. Just to be with him, walk with him as a friend in the cool of the evening, take a stroll, or on an empty beach. Sometimes I take 24 hours, a few times a year. I don't do it very often, but just to stop, go away, flick kindly, has for years enabled me to do it, and just stop for 24 hours and just take time out to be with God. And some of the best moments of that have been where I've just gone out for a walk with God, just meditating on a psalm or just listening to some worship music, just enjoying time with God. And Robin spoke about that last week, didn't he? About closing the door on all the busyness, on all the noise, and just being with Jesus. No other agenda other than being with him. And I just wonder, how are you doing with that? How am I doing with that? Are we taking that time to just be with Jesus? To allow him to do that heart surgery that he did on Peter, to allow him to speak to the deep stuff in us. Because following is going at their pace. If you're trying to follow them, it's no good charging on ahead or whatever. When I go for walks with Flick, she's a bit slower paced than me. And if I'm following her, and she often wants me to walk with her so we can chat as we go, if I'm following her, I need to go at her pace. It's no good charging on ahead. Jesus is the pace setter in our lives. And I love Peter in this because the pace changes. At the start, Peter's all over getting to Jesus. He's out the boat. He's putting on clothes to jump in the water, which I've never understood, but he does that anyway. He puts on his top to jump in the water, then runs to Jesus. But then it's Jesus that sets the pace and the agenda after that. Once you get into the presence of God with that thirst and that eagerness and that hunger, then let Jesus set the pace. And that's the story of the Old Testament as well. The Israelites, they were to follow the presence of God by day and by night, and they were to go at the pace of the presence of God, to stop when it stopped, to go when it went. That's what following means. That's what it means to be a follower. And sometimes God goes at a slower pace than us. I don't know if you've noticed that. I'm in a rush. But if we want to be a follower of Jesus, we've got to learn to wait on him, to go at his pace. And I think about the recovery house. Man, that feels gone slow. start, things happening, then not happening, prophetic words, pushing doors, taking steps backwards. The pace has gone a lot slower than I would have liked. Even this week, we had a situation where one of the guys who's been involved in doing something for us has been taken seriously ill. And I'm like, oh, that's a bother, isn't it? My first thought, that's a nuisance. We're not going to get this open. And then God kind of gives me a slap around the face and says, I said this was about people. What about this man who's not very well, very unwell? What are you thinking about him and his situation? And God just reminded me I don't know this guy at all really, other than his name and an email, but just to pray for him and pray for his family. We go at God's pace. He's got it in hand, but we have to go at his pace. And of course, does it mean we can't ask God to move and act? Of course, no. We can say, God, we want you to, but we have to come with humility, and we have to come with saying, God, your timing's perfect. Your way's higher than mine. And like I said, if you look in the Bible, God seems to be in no rush most of the time. Abraham and Sarah, 25 years to have a kid. Israelites, 40 years in the wilderness. David, like running, anointed king, but then spending his life being hunted down for a good few years. The people of God waiting 400 years for Jesus. And then when he comes, he doesn't even come as a king. He comes as a little baby. And then we have to go through all the little baby years, and then the toddler years, and then the teenage years. And then it says in Romans, at just the right time, these things happened. Following Jesus is staying in step with him. To be a follower, you've got to be surrendered to his ways and his pace. And then finally, I'm just going to speak briefly on this, because I'm going to speak more on this next week. We're to do following together. Notice what he says to Peter. He says, do you love me? And then Peter's response, yeah, you know I do. And then Jesus gives him instructions, then go away and feed my sheep. Then make sure you feed my sheep. And he says it 3 times, care for them, tend them, feed them. Peter then goes and taught, in 1 Peter 5, he then goes and he's instructed some leaders of a church, and he says the very same thing that Jesus has told him to do. He says, shepherd the flock of God. Don't do it under compulsion, but willingly, those that you're in your charge, be an example for the flock, he says. And he's writing to leaders, of course, but actually Jesus is clear that every follower of Jesus is called to express their love for Jesus, their following of Jesus, by loving other people. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I've loved you. You are to love one another. By this, people are going to know that we're his disciples, that we're followers. Tending, caring, feeding, they're all active words. And that's what I mean. Following Jesus is active. It's an active thing. It is submissive. It means Jesus is Lord, I'm following him, but it's not passive. We're meant to show we're followers by what we do for one another, by how we love people. It means offering to help people out, doesn't it? It means inviting people over for coffee. It means praying for one another. It means on this beach scene, having a barbecue, taking a stroll, helping each other out, giving lifts to people, helping them feel loved and loving and being loved yourself. Being present with people, taking notice of people. I just wondered, have you looked around the room? Who's in the room? Who in the room? Just take a moment, look around. Who's in the room? Who might need an encouragement today? Who might need to just be noticed? Who's missing? These are all ways to think about how we love one another. So we're going to finish. We're going to take communion. We're going to get the kids back in. Ben, would you do me a favour and go and give Flick a nod to get the kids back in? That'd be amazing. Thank you. Tom, would you prepare the communion stuff? That'd be great. Yeah. And I just want to say, do we need that fresh moment with Jesus, that fresh encounter of invitation? Maybe he's come a bit of a background thing. Do we need to just spend some time meditating on that first encounter with him, what that's like? Are there voices that we might need to just kind of turn down? Like I said, the competing sat-navs, do we need to shut one of those down in our lives? Are we going at his pace? Do we need to make sure that we're spending time? There's a story in the Old Testament where a young lad is hearing the voice of God and he doesn't recognise it, and then he goes to his master and then his master says to him, this is what you're going to say when you hear that voice of God again. You're going to say this: speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Maybe we haven't been going at God's pace. Maybe we need to just say, God, what is it you want to say to me? And then how are we doing tending and caring for others? This week I've had 2 examples where I've heard stories of people's really simple acts of kindness, but they've had a massive impact, much bigger than we would think. And as I say, we don't know when we throw out the little seeds what sort of fruit they're going to bear. But what I do know is if you don't cast out seed, you don't get any fruit. So are we just doing seeds faithfully amongst each other, amongst those around us? Let's think about how we do following together. So we're going to have communion now together. Jesus said this is a time when we celebrate. It's a moment when we are expectant of Jesus to come back. This is we do this as a remembrance of what he's done for us in the breaking of bread, his body broken, in the drinking the wine is his blood shed for us. We do this as a remembrance of what he's done for us, his love for us through that. But he says, keep doing this until I come back. So it's a looking forward as well. So we do this together to remember that we're a people that are excited with a hope and an expectation that Jesus, one day we'll have a feast with Jesus. That'll be an amazing day. One day we'll have a feast with Jesus. So we're going to just do communion together. Jesus says, do this because it's a remembrance also that you are together in it, that actually creates a family. And so it's a reminder that we do it together. And then the other thing I would say, if you're not a follower of Jesus, I'd just say, don't come and participate in this bit. You're very welcome among us. But if you're not a follower of Jesus, don't do this bit, because this is for those that see Jesus. We take this bread and we drink the wine because we believe that Jesus did this for us. So if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you're not there yet, if you've got your questions, that's fine. And you're welcome amongst us, but just don't participate in this bit if that's okay. So we're going to just do that now, and maybe there's someone in the room you just want to give a gentle encouragement to as you do it, so you can grab a bit and take it over to them. But we're going to do that, and then I'm going to leave that a few minutes, and then I'll just close to finish